Hey, I'm Rachel,
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
powered by DoorDash. Our guest today is Althia Raj, the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star and a fixture in Canadian political journalism. She's covered federal politics for nearly 2 decades, previously serving as the founding Ottawa bureau chief for HuffPost Canada, and she's a regular voice on CBC's At Issue panel. Today, she's here to give us a deep dive into the federal budget, what's really in it, what it says about the government's priorities, and how the opposition parties are positioning themselves in response to it. From the politics behind the numbers to the narratives taking shape in Ottawa, Althia's here to help us unpack what the budget actually means for us as Canadians, and also what it reveals about where the country and its leaders are headed now.
Althia Raj joins us now. Whoa, what a week. We're
What a
talking
week.
about budget. It's a biggie, and I know you've been talking about it all week long. Lots of opinions, lots of drama around it, lots of questions about whether or not it's going to pass. But I think I'd love to start with the big picture. What is the story that this budget is trying to tell Canadians?
I guess you can see the budget as, yes, a financial document and also a political document. So as a financial document, I would say that Mark Carney, has a very unusual pedigree for a prime minister, being the former Bank of Canada governor, being a former senior bureaucrat in the finance department, being the governor of the Bank of England. And obviously, it's a very clear vision of where he thinks the gaps in the Canadian economy are and what needs to be done about it. Some of the things that he is suggesting that Canada should do are actually things that might seem like you've heard before, because they're actually things that Justin Trudeau started to do, but maybe not with the same, well, definitely not with the same amount of money and perhaps not with the same drive. In a way, this budget is a big bet on what Mr. Carney thinks will happen, what this budget can create for the future. So basically, the federal government is going to borrow a whole bunch of money, and it's going to try to use that money to encourage private businesses to invest more in the Canadian economy, whether that's in housing or it's in the defense industry. He's just making a big bet that he can leverage taxpayers' money to encourage private to spend, to further down the line create better jobs and better careers and bigger paychecks for Canadians. But in terms of like what you will get once this budget passes in your pocket, frankly, not much is new, because the big tax cut that you might hear people talk about around this budget was actually delivered earlier this summer. It was a campaign promise. So as a political document, it's a bit odd, because it's basically saying to Canadians, you need to sacrifice, because, we're going to let lapse some extra long-term care funding. We're going to let lapse some extra healthcare funding. And we're going to cut 40,000 jobs or positions. We don't know if those people are going to be leaving through attrition or through early retirement, but we're going to cut 40,000 positions in the public service. And we're going to cut a bunch of other government programs. We won't tell you what those are yet. So you are asking people to make sacrifices for a big bet that you're hoping comes through down the line, but we don't know when exactly we will know when that bet happens. It's slightly unusual as a political document.
So I want to understand the context of this budget a little bit better, because we've been hearing so much about this deficit. And for context, Justin Trudeau ran a $3 trillion deficit in 2020 to try and combat the COVID-19 pandemic, which that was the reasoning behind that. In 2008, Stephen Harper launched Canada's Economic Action Plan, an infrastructure spending program that tried to get us through that economic storm. Does this budget feel reminiscent of the Harper 2008 budget, where it's about spending to get us out of this economic situation?
Yes and no. because this budget does have a big component that's infrastructure. And it has some very specific projects that are already listed. Like in Gaspésie, Ile de la Madeleine, there's actually 3 projects. Like one of them has to do with the port. One of them has to do with building the airport in the Magdalene Islands. Sorry, in English, not Ile de la Madeleine. So there are infrastructure. There's a lot of infrastructure spend, and the prime minister is also saying to the provinces, I'm willing to invest on big things. Like I will gladly build more hospitals with you, but you also need to kick half the money in. So a lot of it also depends on whether the provinces are willing to spend that money. So yes, there is part of that, but the numbers are larger. And it may not seem that way when people talk about, oh, it's $140 billion of new spending. Maybe we've gotten used during COVID to enormous price tags to things, because that's definitely not the way we used to be talking about things. But a lot of that money that he's going to be investing it's larger because he's reallocating money from what people would say like the fiscal plan that's already set out. So like Justin Trudeau's government had booked X amount of money, and Mark Carney's going to take some of that money and say, okay, well, I'm just going to reallocate it to things that are now my priorities. And so it doesn't seem like he's spending as much new money, but that's because he is spending a ton of money just in different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You talked about, use the word big bets and sacrifice, which are words that we're hearing a lot this week. And I think about the environment that we're in. So all of the context around the trade war, around supply chain shifts, around defense considerations. And these are things that Canadians are talking about as they're hearing about this budget and they're hearing about these sacrifices and these big bets they may not see until years down the line. Do you think that Canadians have more of an appetite or tolerance or willingness to accept the sacrifices or to accept the big bets because of everything else that's happening around the world?
I don't know. I guess we would find out at the voting booth. I think people voted for Mark Carney to fix certain big problems, and this is his plan to do it. But frankly, it requires a long runaway. And the prime minister it's not clear how long his runaway is because he is a minority government.
Right.
So it's the type of budget that you would expect a majority government to bring in, kind of like when Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin made big cuts in the mid-1990s, and they told Canadians, and they paved the way by saying, basically, the government's going to go bankrupt, and so we need to slash social spending and healthcare, and everyone's going to have to sacrifice together because we need to get our fiscal house in order. And Canada has had a very big problem with productivity for a long time. And Mark Carney is saying we need growth. We need to encourage the private sector to be more productive. These are the things that I think are going to make the private sector more productive, that are going to lead to growth, that are going to make us less dependent on Donald Trump in the United States, that sets us up for the long term. But that's like a big plan. And that's why, if the government falls on Monday, November 17th, when the House returns, well, this could be the shortest lived budget. I mean, it may not exist, right? If he gets a majority government, then he will be able to implement it. But if he continues to have a minority, then we have another fiscal update in the spring. And by then, maybe some of the program cuts will start to be felt. And then will the New Democrats, the party that's more on the left, decide that these cuts are worth it for this long-term plan? Or will they say, I'm not ready to support this because I don't see my priorities, and I don't think the voters that sent us to Ottawa believe that we should be supporting policies like this. So I don't know if the public is really going to be supportive. And, you look down the line in 2 years, if the prime minister decides to keep funding healthcare at a 3% increase rather than a 5% increase, with it, an aging population, will the left-wing parties, the NDP, the Bloc Québécois, support his plan? So you're basically asking the money that normally goes to people to be sacrificed for money that's going to things. Like the image on the budget is an icebreaker. It's actually an icebreaker owned by a private firm based out of Montreal, which I thought was interesting. But you compare that to the image on the cover of Justin Trudeau's last budget, which was like 4 smiling, happy people. And it tells you exactly where the government's priorities are. They're on, we're going to make things and we're going to grow the economy through things, and not by directly investing in people and trying to make them richer. And then I guess the other part is the Conservatives have been, hammering the Liberals for a while now on affordability. And there's nothing in this budget that you can say makes my life more affordable in like 3 months, right? After it passes. So that's also going to be, I think, a really big challenge. And that's why it's a big bet economically. It's also a big bet politically.
See, Amanda, it's worth keeping the budgets. She made fun of me last week that I keep all the physical budgets, but we wouldn't know that. The picture really is reminiscent of the time period. So maybe we should do a deep dive on those covers because I have all of them. Okay. I want to ask you about surprises. For me, I kept hearing this number, $100 billion deficit. And when I heard it was 78, I was like, whoa, like, did they rein it in? Like, what happened here? What was surprising to you in this budget?
Mostly the political stuff was surprising to me. The deficit number was a lot lower than we had been expected. So in a way, we constantly hear the advice that politicians are given is like under promise and over deliver. And in this way, through the deficit number, they got there, right? I mean, they didn't get there in the way that the Conservatives wanted them. The Conservatives kept saying, we want you to maintain the deficit at $42 billion, which is what Justin Trudeau had. But there was no way that Mark Carney could ever do that because he has promised to increase defense spending by a huge amount, 5% of GDP in the next 10 years, 2% this year. So we knew it was going to be a very, very large number. The reason it's not as large is because they do a lot of that reallocation of the Trudeau money in different ways. Could they have, I guess I could also say that it could have been a lot lower if the government had decided to keep the reciprocity tariffs that they had campaigned on in the spring. So in the spring, they said, we're going to make $20 billion through tariffs. And then they dropped the tariffs. So, you could have, the balance could have been like $58 billion budget deficit, I should say. So yeah, it wasn't as big as we expected, but on the surprises, there was nothing in there to clearly buy opposition support.
So totally.
I felt like that was the surprise. Like, you have a minority government.
Yeah.
Mark Carney is 3 sheets shy, but really he's kind of like, he's 3 votes shy, but that means that the speaker has to break the tie.
Right.
So the NDP had not made its demands explicit in a way because they're 7 MPs in that caucus who don't necessarily get along. Actually, I'm being too polite. Who don't get along and have different priorities. And I think Don Davies, the interim leader of the NDP, would have had a hard time saying to Mark Carney, I can deliver 7 votes, but you need to do all these things that he probably wasn't going to do. So there are things in there that you can say are like, okay, they're funding a Filipino community center that's near Don Davies's riding. Maybe that's a way to try to get Don Davies's vote, but not clear. So there are things in there that also make it really difficult for the NDP to support the budget, the 40,000 positions in the public service. The Bloc Québécois had made its demands known formally, and the government decided to ignore all of them.
Yeah. So
you can see why they don't want to vote for this budget, even though there are things that they can point to, like the 3 projects in the Bloc MPs riding in Gaspé, Magdalene Islands, or the $1 billion, which apparently is the most funding we've ever had in one shot for the arts sector.
Yeah.
That, the Bloc Québécois, if it wanted to vote for the budget, could latch on and say, we don't want to see that money go away. but they didn't make a very clear overture. And perhaps the best example of that is Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Okay, she's only one vote.
Yep.
But she only made one demand. And it wasn't a huge demand. She said, I don't want to see any fossil fuel subsidies, like basically tax breaks to the oil and gas sector.
Right.
And then the government put a fossil fuel subsidy for the LNG sector. So it's like they're almost daring the opposition. Like everybody's playing chicken and you're waiting for like who's willing to cross the road.
Are they daring them? Like, does this government want to go into an election to try and get a majority? Is that what's happening here in your mind?
I don't believe so. I mean, Amanda probably has more liberal tea leaves to read than I do, but
she's shaking her head. So
this is not a budget that you would want to go into an election on. Like some of the things in here are like, really? Like you want to privatize airports? Really? You want to look into that? I don't know that the public will want that. Certainly not the typical liberal coalition would be like, yes, privatizing airports is a great idea. Or, you know, if your opposition has branded you as an elite, why is the thing that, you know, the people getting a tax break here are the people who are trying to buy jets and yachts?
Yeah. What's that about?
Why would you do that? Well, François-Philippe Champagne, the finance minister, was asked that question in the lockup. So on Tuesday morning, journalists get huddled into the old Ottawa City Hall and we get a copy of the budget. We get to pour through it. And the finance minister comes and gives us a press conference before he goes to deliver the budget. And so when the embargo is lifted and the markets close and reporters can report what happened, we have the finance minister on the record for half an hour answering our questions. And he was asked about that. And he said, well, the cost of the tax break, it costs more to taxpayers to administer this tax break than the revenue it raises through the tax. So that's why we're cutting it. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I guess you have to take him at his word, and maybe that does make sense if you're driving towards efficiencies, but it certainly makes it unpopular to suggest that the only people getting a direct tax break in this budget are basically really wealthy people who can afford to buy jets and yachts, right? So I shouldn't say yachts because boats are very expensive. So rich people can afford to buy boats, not just yachts.
It's all boats.
But not canoes and kayaks, don't worry.
Not those.
Not those. Small boats are okay.
Small boats are fine. Back to the NDP for a second, because I talked about this last night, 2 nights ago on CBC. We talked about the NDP, these 7 votes, like where are they going to go? And one of the things that I noted, agree, there wasn't a specific list of demands, but there's a lot in this budget for the NDP to like because they helped to negotiate it the first time around, right? Like there weren't any cuts to dental care, pharmacare, $10 a day childcare is still there, expansion to the Canada benefits claim, the national school food program, the subsidy for 100,000 youth jobs. Like there's things that I could imagine them building a narrative around.
Climate core.
Votes, yeah, exactly. Do the votes come from a few NDP who think, listen, there's stuff there that we cared enough about to go into an agreement with these guys just, a couple of years ago. So I'm prepared to support the fact that they didn't make cuts in those areas. What do you think about that?
Yes. If the NDP wanted to say we don't want an election and everybody else is acting irresponsibly and they will have to come to us to save the government from itself, and 3, most likely the male members of that caucus, Don Davies, Gord Johns, and Alexandre Boulris, say, okay, we'll put water in our wine, lots and lots and lots of water, and we will go to the polls. We'll avoid going to the polls and get this done. But you could also see it as, well, are the Liberals breaking their promise with the NDP? Because that pharmacare plan was supposed to start off with 2 categories of drugs, but then have a full study of that and look at expanding it. And the government is not moving forward with that idea at all. It's stopping with contraception and diabetes medication. So is that a broken promise? The bigger challenge for the NDP is that they are a Labour Party. and they are in a
Right.
struggle with maintaining the Labor vote. The Conservatives have been eating their lunch, and we saw that in the last election in very surprising areas like Windsor, for example, where blue collar workers have gone to the Conservatives in droves. They've gotten the support of private sector unions, especially in the building trades area. And the NDP is like, this is a big problem. It's a problem for our survival. And it's who we are at our core. We are a workers' party. We are founded by the labor movement. And if there are job cuts in this budget and we're not reallocating those workers somewhere else, how can we look at our core voters and say, we're here fighting for you? So it's a really hard position to put those members in a way that probably doesn't exist, in the Bloc Québécois caucus or even within the Conservative caucus. You have to believe that by I would say, coming very late to the game of negotiating with the opposition leaders. Prime Minister Carney only started meeting with the opposition leaders in October. Like, he knew what the math was in the spring, right?
Yeah.
He had all summer to sit down with them and say, what is it that you would like? How can I craft a budget with you in mind? Not like, we've already gone through several cabinet meetings and decided what the budget's going to look like. Oh, maybe I can add like a few extra projects and lists and amend a few pages here and there. But that didn't happen. You have to think that they were already thinking, okay, how can we go get those 3 votes, right? And this week we saw Chris D'Entremont, the former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, who's a former Progressive Conservative member of the Nova Scotia Assembly, move over and join the Liberals. Not totally surprising, if I'm really honest. But there are a lot of, the Prime Minister himself suggested that there might be more floor crossers to come in his press conference on Wednesday after Mr. D'Entremont crossed the floor. So maybe they're still hoping to get those 2 extra votes through Conservatives. I can't see anybody from the Bloc Québécois actually walking across the aisle, nor can I see anybody from the NDP doing that. And maybe that's how they get to pass their budget. This is a majority budget.
Yeah. Are you hearing, what are the rumblings? Do you think the rumors are true? Will there be more floor crossers? This is what's on everyone's mind. Are people going to walk across the aisle to give the Liberals the votes they need and to join the party?
I don't know if there will be more floor crossers. I say that there are a lot of people who would like to cross the floor. It's really hard to cross the floor. Like, imagine you've been part of a family and like you've volunteered and you've given money and like your whole family has sacrificed for this party's cause and your friends are in that party. And even if you don't like your leader and you don't like his tone and you're kind of worried about the direction that the Conservative Party is going in, and you're like, I'm afraid that we're going to end up being like the Republican Party in the United States, and I'm more like a Mitt Romney Republican. I'm not a Donald Trump Republican. To make that decision, you're thinking, okay, well, maybe is my leader that I don't like going to stay here for a really long time? Or is it possible that he only has like 18 months left or another 24 months? And can I outlive him and then still see myself in this party? If I cross the floor, am I doing it because I think I'm not running again? Or am I doing it because I think that I have a better chance of winning my seat as a Liberal? Like we saw that the polls would suggest that Mr. D'Entremont could win his seat as a Liberal in his riding at the moment, especially with Mark Carney as a Prime Minister, like a blue Liberal. Jenica Atwin, if that name may be familiar to some people, she was a Green Party candidate who was elected in 2019 in the riding Fredericton, and she joined the Liberals just before the 2021 election and was elected as a Liberal.
Yeah.
So you have these calculations happening in the back of your head. And there was like so many rumors this week about another possible floor crosser, and it didn't, as I say this to you, as we're recording this, that hasn't materialized. I say that because I think it's important to add the caveat, because I don't know. That person might still cross the floor. But it's really, really hard. So there's another option though, is are there enough members, because I have a hard time believing that only one person would do this on their own, enough members who say, okay, I cannot cross and become a liberal. Like, I am not a liberal, but I don't like what's happening to our party and I don't want an election. So I will sit as an independent. And I will sit as an independent and hope that, I'm not burning my Conservative Party card, but I'm trying to send the party a message, and will other of my colleagues come and follow? And we saw that many years ago, actually like 2 decades ago now, when Stockwell Day was the leader of the Canadian Alliance, and Chuck Straw was like, basically did not like Stockwell Day, wanted a leadership change of direction. And then that's actually what ended up happening. A bunch of MPs formed their own caucus, and then it led to Stockwell Day leaving as leader and new leadership. And, lo and behold, a few years later, you have Stephen Harper as Prime Minister of Canada. There are other options to floor crossing. It's just, I'm not sure how many people have the appetite to do so. And the other thing I should note here is how much control rests in the leader's office. So in order to present yourself as a candidate, you have to get the leader to sign your nomination papers. And that can be wielded against you as a sword, because the leader can decide that they're not going to sign your nomination papers, or that they're not going to protect your nomination, which is typically the case in a minority government, because they say, well, you have to be in Ottawa so often for votes and you're away from your riding, and so we're going to protect you from a local challenger. Well, if they feel that like you're a potential dissenter and you might be in conversations with the Liberals, well, I'm going to let a local contest happen in your riding.
Yeah.
And maybe that will sort itself out. So there's like different pressure points that Mr. Poilievre can also use against his MPs to try to keep them in line.
Okay, I want to talk.
It's so fun, isn't it?
It's
like
so
when you
much
think
drama.
that politics is boring, you just have to listen to this stuff.
Forget election speculation. Let's talk about floor crossers. Oh my gosh, what a week. Okay, but speaking of pressure points, I want to dive into something you noted earlier, which is the provinces and the role and the relationship between the federal government and the provinces right now, especially in the context of Donald Trump and the tariffs. What did this budget signal to you in terms of Mark Carney giving an olive branch to some of the provinces? I know here in British Columbia, we were looking for funding on major infrastructure projects, hydro line in the north, the port, which is directly tied to trade. Did we get that? Like, what did he give to the provinces here? And now word from our title sponsor, DoorDash. Season 3 of Beyond a Ballot is powered by DoorDash. Just like we go beyond politics, DoorDash goes beyond delivery, investing in people, stories, and communities across Canada. Restaurants are the heart of local neighborhoods, and 83% of merchants say that DoorDash has helped them serve even more customers. For Alex and Andy of Wang Ong, a family-run Vietnamese restaurant in Regina, Saskatchewan, DoorDash has helped introduce a whole new audience to the flavors they grew up with. What began as Alex's mother's passion for sharing authentic Vietnamese cuisine with a new community has become a meaningful way for this father-daughter duo to carry on her legacy. By partnering with DoorDash, the family has been able to share a taste of home with even more people across their community.
He did make some specific funding announcements. He also, through the infrastructure envelope, allows more infrastructure money to come through. Some of the provinces, we've already heard from the premiers, are deeply disappointed. Like Doug Ford was like, there was nothing on the Ring of Fire, which is actually not true. The government is creating a sovereign wealth fund. So it's going to be using taxpayers' money to invest directly in companies that will be mining in the Ring of Fire, that could be mining in the Ring of Fire. He's announcing hundreds of millions of dollars to, lots of people complain that the road infrastructure has not been properly built. So the government is saying, we will use taxpayers' money to help build the first part and the last part of the road. So sometimes you hear politicians say things that they're exaggerating or they're kind of not saying the full story. And then there are things where it's true, like Prime Minister Carney has not put any money on the table to fund Doug Ford's pipe dream of some mega highway tunnel. But most people think that that's unrealistic project anyways, which only seems to be living in his head. But I will say you raise an interesting point, which is what the Prime Minister has done for the provinces and in order to spur economic growth. And on that is this Majors Projects Office and the projects list where they're saying, okay, we're going to build more LNG. We're going to build more a new electricity grid across the country. We're going to do all these great projects, rail lines. There's extra money for there's money for projects that have not been listed on the list of Majors projects that are the government's priority. But next week, during break week, when MPs have gone home to their ridings, the government is supposed to release the next list of projects that basically get a boost. So there may be premiers who are not super happy at the moment who will be quite happy to see their project listed on the projects that will get a boost. And one of those most controversial projects that I don't expect to see on the list, but Premier Smith seems to think will be on the list is her, I'm not sure if it's fair to call it a project, her idea of building a pipeline through basically the old Northern Gateway pipeline through territory where Indigenous people seem to not want a pipeline whatsoever. And there is no private company that wants to build this pipeline at the moment. But she has basically suggested that if this pipeline is not on Mr. Carney's list next week, that it will be a proof point that Canada as a federation does not exist properly and should basically that we don't function as a country. And so Mr. Carney is under a great deal of pressure to give something to Premier Smith. Wasn't clear that it was in this budget. Everything that was in this budget were basically things that we had already heard discussed, like the framework and the tax breaks that would allow Pathways Plus, for example, to get going because the federal government says it's going to increase in a predictable way the industrial carbon price. That's frankly the only way that carbon capture makes any sense. So there is another question mark, I would say to the listener, that is like, what's on this list? And then how does that also affect the vote coming back to the House the following week? Because if there is a pipeline project on that list, I think the question needs to be asked, are all the Liberals going to vote for this budget?
Right.
Yeah.
Then we have another voting issue.
Stephen Guilbeault is going to be glued to his seat. I'll tell you that much.
We have a cross.
They will glue him to his seat.
Literally.
Exactly. That's funny. I also want to go back to something we mentioned a few minutes ago, which was the difference of the covers. I thought that was fascinating that you said that. The difference of the covers, having this Trudeau cover, which was like smiley, happy people, and then the shift in the Carney budget cover. Do you think, for those who are wondering and have heard over and over again, Mark Carney's government really marks a shift in where the Liberals sit on this spectrum? Do you think that this budget is a reflection of that? Do you think the Canadians are going to take away like, wow, this really is different than the Trudeau era?
You know, like everything, Amanda, it's like shades of gray and not black and white. Like I can kind of argue both sides. Like I was surprised how many nods there seemed to be to the Harper era. Like I look back at the 2012 budget when Stephen Harper announced 19,000 job cuts, about 7% of the workforce at the time. Basically, the public service ballooned during COVID is what happened. But some of the stuff that was in that budget really made me think of things that were in this budget, but this budget with larger numbers. Some of the cuts that Stephen Harper made and had so much public outcry, like if you remember back, I guess 15 years, 20 years almost. No.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yep,
old
20
am I?
years. Yeah, exactly.
We had this whole huge debate about how Stephen Harper wanted to cut healthcare to refugees. We had a huge debate when Stephen Harper wanted to cut the long form census at Statistics Canada. Huge debate about like the muzzling of government scientists. Reporters couldn't speak to like Environmental Canada people about the weather. There was also all those big fights. International development assistance. Those cuts are in a like much lighter version in this budget. So despite campaigning in the spring on not cutting international development assistance, we don't know how huge they are, but there are cuts to international development assistance, to bilateral and multinational organizations and government programs. There are cuts to refugee healthcare because the government is now going to make refugees co-pay for pharmacare and dental care. Not the federal programs, but the programs that they call it Federal Interim Health Program. Before refugees get on provincial plans, the federal government takes care of them for a short while. There are cuts to Statistics Canada. They're going to reduce the frequency of collections of some data sets and the quality, just how intensively they survey people on things that they don't think people are looking at as much. These might be very good ideas. Maybe it makes sense. Maybe the refugees can afford to pay for some of their work. Maybe the Statistics Canada, maybe nobody was reading some of these surveys. But you have to believe that someone at some point in the Prime Minister's office said, hold on a second, you do realize that people are going to compare you to Stephen Harper in this front. And that they did so willingly. So there are things that you're like, okay, well, who are you trying to be? You're obviously saying, I'm not Justin Trudeau. I'm cutting the $2 billion planting tree program. We're going to sunset it after the contracts are over. So about 1 billion trees will be planted. I'm going to sunset a lot of the funding that Justin Trudeau announced during COVID. I don't think that's required anymore. We need to balance the books. I'm making hard decisions. Here we go. But then you also see that the idea of the federal government being the driver of certain key sectors, basically picking winners and losers and helping drive economic growth through using federal money. That's a Justin Trudeau idea, right? Like he was heavily criticized for saying like we can grow the economy by like growing the pie, but that's what Mark Carney also believes. So there's kind of two ways of looking at it. I think he is trying to shed the Justin Trudeau era stain on the Liberals and recasting them as a more pragmatic, centrist, even center-right version, trying to say that if you voted for Stephen Harper, you might be able to see yourself in my government. But it's also, spending a lot of money to drive to outcomes, whereas the Conservatives would have been like, let's just slash corporate taxes and try to encourage investment that way.
Let's talk a little bit about two things that Mark Carney did that were new. One being breaking this budget down into two. He has his operational and capital budgets, and the other being that he's changed the official budget date from days gone by when we'd all be in the spring and freaking out about the budget. It's now happening every year in the fall. Can you talk to us about the impact of those two decisions?
So the operational and capital spending, I think, is a way for them to say, we're going to balance the book. So they're going to balance the book through operational spending. They're going to cut spending in the bureaucracy. Operational spending is also, though, social programs.
Right.
So that's basically the money that directly goes to people. That's operational. Capital is the investments for the future. And it allows him to spend a lot of money, but not say that he's driving towards increasing the deficit. So it's more of a PR exercise, I think, than real change in the way the government views its finances. The budget date, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but is actually a big deal. And I think that's it's a good idea. It's a good idea, but it's not in my self-interest. As a journalist, I will tell you why in a second. But So putting the budget in November basically means that it will be passed by the time construction season starts. So that if there is investment, then, the provinces and municipalities know what's coming and they have enough time to take advantage of the next year's construction season. Otherwise, we're a cold country in most places in this country. So like you have to wait almost like 18 months before you can start seeing the impacts of the budget on like building roads and things that don't get done in December. One thing though that is interesting is that budgets mean confidence votes. It usually decides whether or not we have an election.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which means instead of having elections in April, May, and June, or sometimes July, depending on how late the budget was, we're going to have Christmas time elections.
Yeah. Try putting a sign in the ground in Ontario at Christmas.
So, it means that I and probably you guys won't be spending a ton of time with your family in the lead up to Christmas.
Exactly.
It might make it harder to get volunteers out to come and door knock. It's just not a lot of fun to campaign in the winter. So it's definitely a decision made for the good of the country and not one that was at all remotely done or thought of in terms of political considerations, which is probably the story of this budget, frankly. This is a budget that is drafted by a technocrat who has a very clear view of how he thinks the Canadian economy can be set on the right track. And he is trying to bring the country there. And it is not a political savvy document intended to address the political realities of the situation, to ensure that he has public support on side, that he has opposition support on side.
It's funny that you went this place because we only have a few minutes left, but I'm curious, as a journalist, how do you think the framing of this budget is compared to previous budgets? Like we talked a little about the cover, we talked about some of the big messages coming out of it. Do you think that this has been pretty consistently covered the same way across the country? Or do you think that, the framing has really varied across the country, given some of the things that we talked about today?
I don't know how it's been covered across the country because I'm not in every market. So I'm not listening to like what's being said on talk radio, for example, or what people are seeing on their local pages on the internet when they like check their feeds. And because I was going to say, the newspaper boxes, but nobody drives through newspaper boxes anymore.
If only.
I'm not sure how it's being covered locally. There's enough projects that are specifically listed, which is a little odd, to drive local coverage, like to go back to my Magdalena Islands example, like, hey, if this budget passes, we're getting a beefed up airport. But I think the bigger challenge, frankly, is the government didn't overpromise and underdelivered in the scope of the budget. And maybe they were trying to tell us this is a really important budget and we need to see it in the context that it is being written in, i.e. like Donald Trump is threatening our economic security and we have to make big changes. But when you hear François-Philippe Champagne talk about, generational investments, and this is going to be like building the St. Lawrence Seaway, and it's going to unlock all this opportunity, and you're creating this image in people's imagination.
Yeah.
I don't know that I feel like this budget did not deliver that. And usually when we go to those lockups that I was talking about in the past, Michael Sabia, when he was the deputy minister, he's now the top public servant in the government, the clerk of the Privy Council, he would talk for about an hour about what the government is trying to do with this budget. This time, nobody had that conversation about what is the government trying to do. What we had, though, was Mark Carney deliver a speech about 2 weeks ago and say that he was always going to be truthful with Canadians. He was going to tell us that we would have to make sacrifices, and that basically he was going to bring forward big changes. Again, I'm not sure that this document reflects the speech that he gave. So I you kind of see where they're trying to go. But they seem to be having difficulty bringing people alongside with them because their narrative keeps changing. And maybe that's because the budget kept changing. Like in September, Mr. Carney talked about his budget in terms of austerity.
Right.
And so you thought huge cuts. But then this budget has a lot of spending, actually, like way more spending, more cuts than he promised in the spring election.
Right.
But much more spending too. So I don't know that they know what story they want to tell with this budget. And if they do, well, then I will say that story is not entirely clear. And this idea of generational investments, also not clear. Also not clear that they can keep this plan on the rails they have set it on. Forget about the political calculations. I just mean in terms, even if they survive, will people continue to support this plan if they don't actually see any results immediately or in the near future? That's the big challenge with this.
Okay, I want to ask you one. I have two questions. One is a short one, and the other is about a message to our listeners. Number one, did Donald Trump read our budget? Do you think that the White House is? Do you think the White House is watching?
I believe there are people in the U.S. government who absolutely did read the budget. Did Donald Trump read the budget?
He does weird stuff. Who knows? Who knows, really?
Not a chance.
Maybe he saw some tweets about it. Or X.
Yeah. He's probably texting with Carney about it. Texting Carney, what's this yacht thing all
What's
about?
in it for me? No, in fact, Donald Trump is never mentioned in this budget. And there are a lot of things that you would have thought would have been mentioned because of the Trump threat. Like there's nothing specific for autos. There's like steel announcements that had been done before and promises made in the spring budget about like helping companies retool to address the tariff threat and, you know, create a buy Canadian policy. But you almost get the sense that they didn't want to antagonize Donald Trump by putting things in here that he might have a problem with.
That's interesting. Okay, so to our listeners, where does this leave Canada? What is this moment in time now that we've seen this budget?
Just a small question to end on.
An existential thought.
Well, I guess the big question is really, will the budget survive?
Yes.
Will this government survive? So
exactly.
If the Liberals manage to get 2 more floor crossers, or if the opposition decides that the country doesn't need an election, or that there's more good than bad in this budget, or that they prefer Mark Carney to be prime minister than Pierre Poilievre potentially, then this budget sails through. The big challenge in this budget is going to be execution. And that will depend on how long the Liberals are in office, and if they are removed from office, if the Conservatives decide to keep some of these policies in place to drive towards the outcome that Mark Carney wanted. I don't know that this budget will exist long enough for us to be able to make that determination.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Sorry, that sounds a little depressing as a note, but
no, it was a little doomy and gloomy, but
listen, that's the story of our political lives these days, unfortunately, but we're hoping there's better times ahead, and this budget hopefully will make it better if it passes.
But
That's
you are,
I guess it depends who you ask, though.
I know. It's true. I'm like, it's definitely going to pass. No.
I mean, there's a lot of money, and that means a lot of debt and a lot of servicing the debt. And you can see why, you know, young Canadians maybe are like, I don't know, this is not really what I want. What's in it for me lately? Give me a tax break.
Yep.
All right. Well, Althia, we are so thrilled to have you, and you're just so eloquent in your analysis and balanced, and Amanda and I were laughing and crying along with you, which shows that you have such great insight that, you know, really reflects the moment that we're in this country. So thank you for coming and sharing your budget analysis, and we'd love to have you back.
Thank you for inviting me anytime. It's more interesting than watching primetime.
I'm glad. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening. New episodes air every Friday.
Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and find us at beyondaballot.com.